Welcome to After the Bell. I am your host, Lauren Kramer. This is a podcast for cancer thrivers. We share cancer thriver stories. We share tips, tricks, education, all the things to help you succeed through your treatment, through your survivorship, through it all. Today we are talking to Kate Ellis. She has been through cancer 3 separate times, and she is currently in active treatment. Please listen to her story. It is quite an interesting one. Please welcome Kate with me.
I wish I'd put on makeup, but I thought this is
Your skin looks great.
how a cancer patient looks. So.
It's true. Be real, you know? It took a while for me to, I was telling somebody the other day that when I had lost my hair, I didn't want to show my son. He was 2 at the time, 2.5. And I was so terrified to let him see because I just didn't know, was he going to recognize his mom? And he had no idea. He was just living his little toddler life. Yeah. But it's a mind, it's a mind F. Yes. But less about me, more about you.
It's been more of a mind F the second time.
Yeah. So
I don't know how to even.
I want to know all about that because I, see that was it 3 times you were diagnosed? So how did, take me through all that, because I'm so sorry you have experienced that, because that's literally the worst. No, that's everybody's fear of having it happen again. So
I was diagnosed in 2020, December 2020, at the height of the pandemic.
Yeah.
With ER, PR positive and HER2 negative breast cancer. And at that point, at least in Canada, in Ontario, they were only doing life and limb surgeries, basically life saving.
Right.
So I wanted to have a double mastectomy because I just felt like that was what was right for me. And they couldn't or wouldn't do it at that point because of the limitations on ORs and stuff like that. I was like, I'm going to keep coming back until you take my other breast off, because I just feel like that's what's right for me. And are you still there?
Yeah. Yes. Can you see me or hear me?
Yep. So I had my mastectomy, and then I had what's called an Oncotype DX, right, which most people in the community know what that means. And it indicated that I wouldn't benefit from chemo. So I went right to hormone therapy, which was tamoxifen and Zoladex to shut down my ovaries. And I continued to advocate for myself to have a prophylactic mastectomy as part of reconstruction. Mm-hmm. And so in June of 2021, my reconstruction surgery was scheduled, but it was canceled and pushed off to July because of OR stuff. So, you get your head wrapped around this big surgery, and then it was delayed. So July 15th, I believe. It's funny how all these dates stand out when you can't remember much else, but all those dates, everybody remembers those.
Yeah.
I had my reconstruction, and it was pretty brutal. And a week later, I went into my plastic surgeon's office for a checkup, and she had my pathology, and she said, well, it's a good thing you decided to have this done because you have had cancer in your healthy breast. And I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're allowed. Go for it.
Okay. So then that was very difficult. I mean, it was affirming in that I know what's best for myself. I know my body. Something must have, in my mind, been connected to what was happening.
Yeah.
And so because I'd already had an Oncotype DX, my oncologist, and I'd been on hormone therapy, my oncologist did what's called a mammoprint, and that's usually reserved for postmenopausal women. Okay. And I was premenopausal, but because I'd already been on treatment, the oncotype would have been irrelevant.
Right.
So I waited from July 2021 to October 2021 to learn whether or not I would benefit from chemo.
Oh my God.
A lot of waiting.
Why?
So we have a public healthcare system.
Yeah.
And the government denied the request the first time because they said they'd already paid for genomic testing with the oncotype. And my oncologist, this is a new cancer on the other side, please proceed. And so they did. And then when they sent the slice of my tumor off to California, I call it the tumor vacation. Because nobody was going on vacation at that point except for my tumor.
It was just living its best life, going to
Yeah,
California, I guess.
California. But they didn't send a big enough slice. So that was another delay. So then they had to send another slice. It was just like anyone who's followed my story has seen that it's
Yeah.
just been like one, I don't know if disaster is the right word, but things just go sideways a lot. So I started chemo in November of 2021 and finished in January 2022. And I was away from my job as a child protection worker for about 2.5 years. And I went back last fall. No, fall 2023. And ironically, my first day back full time at my job, I had a CT scan that was intended for someone else. Like I went to the CT. I'm like, I don't know what this is about, but I think it's for my liver because it's being followed. And the ultrasound tech heard me talking to an old lady in the waiting room about what I was having done. And she's like, this isn't for your liver. This is for a follow-up on a nodule on your lung. I was like, what? So I proceeded, but I was confused and I was a little miffed
Yeah.
because typically my oncologist would talk to me about this type of thing. So I followed up with the cancer center the next day. Then my oncologist called me crying that afternoon. And you never want to get a call from your oncologist when they're in tears, right?
Yeah.
She's usually very composed and very professional. And she had made a mistake. It was the person before me. Whenever I had seen her, she just ticked the wrong box. So it was intended for someone else. However, they found a nodule on my lung that was 3 centimeters, which is pretty large, and it hadn't been there previously. So that prompted a whole other series of events. Like I needed a PET scan, and it turns out after all of that that it was benign. But throughout that, they also found nodules on my thyroid that needed biopsied. And so like I was back at work full time, but my work duties were placed on hold because it was looking like maybe I would have to go off again. So all of that to say, in the routine follow up from that to make sure everything was shrinking and going the way it was supposed to, there was an incidental finding of triple negative breast cancer in my armpit. So that's what I'm being treated for now.
How does that happen?
I'm not sure. Ask like what I think I did say, like, what the fuck is happening? Like, how does this happen? And her explanation is probably just my genetics.
Is it
Although I
possible that so you were being treated for hormone positive cancer? Is it possible that it's triple negative because you were already treating it? Do you know
I'm
what I'm
not
saying?
sure. Like, I'd have to ask more questions. I've sort of just been in like crisis mode
Yeah.
because I mean, anyone in my situation probably would be.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Did it mutate and turn into something else? Was
Yeah.
it part of me wonders if it was there when they took off my healthy breast and it's just been like laying dormant? Like, I'm not really sure. And interestingly, while I'm being treated for triple negative, my treatment has stopped for my hormone positive. So that doesn't feel very good to me either. While logically I know that the chemo I'm getting would kill anything that was going on, it's still kind of a weird feeling.
Oh, because you can't, you're not allowed to do it at the same time. Like you're not allowed to
I
take.
guess it's probably too toxic. Like I can't
Yeah.
take. I switched from tamoxifen to anastrozole, which is an AI because I'm in menopause.
Yeah.
So I'm not taking that, and I was getting Zometa infusions for my bones, and that has stopped as well.
Right.
So yeah,
Wow.
my story is like memorable and interesting, and most people are scared by it, I think.
Of course. I completely understand that because it's like, well, first of all, starting off that journey in a situation where they're just, hey, we're not going to do these treatments because of the pandemic. That's just hard. Like that's horrifying. I know somebody who was in a similar situation too, that it was considered elective. So, which elective, like, come on, like, come
Well,
on.
and I recently heard here in Ontario that like reconstruction used to include like balancing of both sides, or like sometimes people get a reduction and so they match
Mhm.
and stuff. But I'm hearing that some of that is being taken away as well. I mean, I'm sure the state of the world right now is not great. And so I think those are some of the impacts that are happening too.
Yeah. So when I wanted to ask when you were talking about reconstruction, what was your, like, what
What
was
was it?
your, yeah,
Okay, so initially I had a single mastectomy on the right side, and then they left. I had delayed reconstruction on the right with tissue expanders, and immediate reconstruction on the left with tissue expanders.
got it.
So, unfortunately, my plastic surgeon said I'm like a perfect example of the differences in those two things. Like I have one, my left breast looks really great, and you can't really even tell that it's not real.
Hmm.
But my right didn't stretch as well, and I was limited by size because my skin didn't stretch.
Did you
And
have radiation?
no, but I will be
Okay.
having that this time.
Okay.
So the lump was in my armpit sort of between my armpit and my breast, and then so I thought I was only going to be getting radiation like in my axilla, but the radiation oncologist wants to do my whole left side just to be safe, I guess. So
Yeah.
I'm a bit worried about that wrecking my reconstruction on
Yeah.
my nice side. Yeah.
So a little different, but I also had a delayed prophylactic mastectomy, and then I did have radiation on the cancer side. But I will say I had expanders in when that happened. They wanted that. And honestly, for me, it held up fairly well. Like I do have, it's different. Like it definitely is different. I was expecting a lot. I think I anticipated a lot worse then because I didn't know, like, what am I just, I'm just guessing. But, and
Mhm.
so I was relieved at like what ended up being
The end
the,
result.
yes.
I'm hoping there's a few things I'm hoping I'm spared. Like previously I was spared radiation, and this time I'm hoping I'm spared capsular contraction and lymphedema. Those are
Yeah.
my and I would take capsular contraction over lymphedema if I had a choice. So, I mean, it's funny the things that we wish for in the aftermath, like our
Hmm.
bar is quite low. Like
Yeah.
I hope it's just arthritis and not bone mets. Like it's funny the things that we bargain and wish for.
That's so true. That is so true. I think like that often, like if I'm feeling a new symptom of some sort, but you have to kind of just, it's just like a new train of thought that you have to go through now. And I'm sure for you too, like I'm sure it's affect like because you've been through this multiple times, I'm sure it's hard to not go there immediately when you have a new feeling in your body. What's like what
Yeah, like my bones have been pretty sore lately, but I take Lapelga after AC chemo, and so I try to rationalize like that's the Lapelga, Kate. Like you
yeah.
don't need, but who would know? Like at this point, if anything could be anything.
What do you remember what your initial oncotype was or onco
Like
score?
the number,
Yeah.
I think it was 12.
Okay. I was curious because it's interesting to me when you were saying that and that, you advocated for yourself and had the whole and then they're like, "Oh no, you actually have cancer in this breast." Like how that related, like how that was growing in your breast maybe during, you know, and like how the oncotype score came back. Like these are all like the rabbit holes we go down, right? Like we question everything.
Yeah, and
And
I would like to dissect it all with somebody, but I don't know who that would be. Like
right.
somebody in the cancer world. I do need to follow up with the genetics department at my hospital because I did have genetic testing because of my age and my family
Mhm.
history. I don't have a defined genetic mutation, but I do have two variants of unknown significance on the BRCA2 gene. So they've since removed one of the variants and said it's not significant, but the other one might be significant.
Interesting.
Yeah.
See, that's also genetics is like wild. It's so wild with that.
Well,
Like you think you have the mutation or not. Like no, there's different variants of that mutation.
yeah. And maybe there's a mutation out there that just hasn't been discovered. I definitely want to stay on top of it because I have a daughter and a sister. And I'm worried about, we did, that calculator, that risk calculator that they suggest people even though only 15% of breast cancer diagnoses have a genetic link. When my sister did that calculator, she had a 43% chance of getting
Wow.
breast cancer. So, yeah.
It's wild.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so you have a daughter.
Yes.
How
She's
old
12.
is she?
She's 12.
How has navigating being a mother and her addressing, like, seeing this, and what has that been like for you, and how have you been navigating that? Because I know that's a whole different layer of dealing with it just yourself.
Yeah. So when I was first diagnosed, we were all home together all the time, and my kids were doing online school. And so they were 7 and 8. So my stepson is 10 months younger than my daughter. So they were 7 and 8 at the time. And they were, I think, we read Cancer Hates Kisses. I don't know if you
Mm-hmm.
know that one. It's a good book for parents with young kids. So we read that, and then that became kind of a funny thing. They would say, "Oh, cancer hates kisses." But life was pretty normal for them in the abnormality. I think that they were exposed to more things than they would have been if they'd been at school. Like,
Yeah.
after I had my mastectomy, I'm sitting in the middle of the living room in my lounge chair, and my daughter's over at the table doing school. My stepson's in the basement doing school. My husband's in another room doing school.
Yeah.
So I wish they'd been a little bit more insulated from the physical pieces. And I had 7 surgeries, 7 cancer related surgeries in a span of 2 years.
Oh my
Like
goodness.
they've seen more than I would have liked, but also, and sadly, this is just a normal part of our life at this point. And so when I had to tell them, um, this most recent time, they were 11 and 12. And so the impact of that was much different than when they were 7 and 8. It was really hard. My stepson cried and he said he was scared. And my daughter wouldn't look at me, and she like burritoed herself in a blanket on the couch, and she cried and just kept saying, like, "But you're going to be okay, right, Mom? You're going to be okay." And like, I want to say,
Oh, I
yes,
think I
of
lost
course
you.
I'm going to be okay. Everything's going to be fine. But I also don't want to lie to her because I don't really know. So she was like not full on crying. She's quite a stoic person in spite of having ADHD and anxiety. She clearly articulates that she doesn't like feelings. And so she just kept repeating, "You're going to be okay, right, Mom? You're going to be
Mm-hmm.
okay." Like, I'm a social worker and I walk this fine line between like telling her the truth and also not scaring her. So I just
Right.
kept thinking, I hope so, because I don't want to ever lie to her. So yeah, telling them was really hard, but sadly, it's been 4 years of this. So it's just a part of our regular, having a bald
Yeah.
mom is kind of normal now. And having, coming home from school and mom's having a nap is normal.
Yeah.
And like my daughter, the previous time, like I mentioned, I'd had quite a few surgeries and chemo and all that kind of stuff. And she made a comment. I asked her about doing something one day, and she said, "Well, as long as you're not having surgery that day." So I know it's impacting them, but
Yeah.
um, it's not maybe the same as other kids who might have moms going through the situation. It makes me sad. Like, my spouse is their primary parent and has been for a long time. It's quite normal for me not to be able to go out and do things with them, or
Yeah.
yeah, I have a lot of guilt, and I wonder how they'll remember this time in our lives when they're older.
Of course. How could you not feel that way? It's completely valid. But
Yeah,
also, you are doing the best that you possibly can. You have to remember that this is what's happening and you are doing your best, and they will, while it's tough and while they are going to this moment in their lives is hard, they're going to be stronger for it, and know that you are fighting the most difficult battle, like I having kids makes this so much worse. And I hate saying it that way because, we love our kids, but cancer sucks. And then having kids while you have cancer sucks times 10.
totally. And I feel like I do think it makes it harder, and it adds another layer. Like, thankfully my kids were older, and so I wasn't having to be like, I don't know how people who had babies or
Right.
toddlers, like, I don't know how they do this.
But it's
Um,
what's the saying? Like devil at every level, because
oh, definitely.
when they're babies, there's like the holding and the like the constant needing. And, for you, when they're older, there's the awareness, right? Like when they're little, they don't have that awareness. Like
Yes.
my kids are blissfully ignorant to all of that phase, and luckily, like hopefully the conversation in the future will be what had happened versus what is happening. So there is always something different,
Devil at every level, though. I am gonna remember that. That's a good one.
because it's true. There's always going to be something. I forget where I heard it, but I loved it too when I heard it. Because it's so true. It's so true. And yeah, it's being a parent regardless regardless is hard. Being a cancer patient regardless is hard.
Yes.
Combine the two, it's like a special recipe for just, it's a lot. It's
It's a
a lot.
hellscape.
It really is. Now, where are you in treatment now? Like, so what do you have left?
So I've completed 12 weeks of carboplatin and paclitaxel with Keytruda, which is an immunotherapy. And now I'm doing AC chemo for 12 weeks, and I'm
Oh,
halfway through. So I'll have my last chemo on March 4th, and the cycle will be done on March 25th. Then I'll get a little bit of a break. Then I'll have surgery, which will be an axillary dissection. Then I'll get another little bit of a break, and then I'll have radiation. And I'm not sure how many weeks of radiation or whether it will be like sometimes you get that special boost. Like, I don't really know what radiation looks like at this point, but
I wonder if they're going to wait to see like through the surgery, like to determine the length of time. Now,
yeah.
did you say you had lymph nodes removed before?
I had sentinel nodes removed
Okay.
before. So one of the complications of the time where they found it, I call it my surprise cancer. They didn't take lymph nodes because they were not expecting to find cancer. And as my surgeon explained to me, like, it's very rare to have bilateral breast cancer. So I don't, like, at that point, he didn't think he needed to take any lymph nodes. So we had to go back. So I had my reconstruction surgery. I was in hospital for a couple of nights. It was super rough. I think I've had a lot of surgery in my life. Like I've had 60% of my liver removed and like all kinds of stuff. But I think reconstruction was the hardest surgery I've ever had and hardest recovery. And so I think it was 3 weeks after that, I had to go back in for another surgery to get the sentinel nodes. And so I still had a nipple left because they did a nipple sparing, skin saving. It was a bunch of terms. So I had to get a needle in my nipple to try to find lymph nodes.
Oh,
So
jeez.
they were able to find a couple of sentinel nodes, but that's all they took. And in hindsight, I wonder if he had done an axillary dissection, if they would have found micro metastases at that
Hmm.
point. I mean, we can't go back, but I do
No,
wonder about lots of different possible scenarios in this. I still think it's the best case of the worst case scenarios that I have going on, but I'm not sure.
of course. And you're never gonna know. So don't do that to yourself.
And like when I look at my situation, like my first two cancers were stage 1B. But if you look at the whole of my cancer experience, like I've been through more than someone of my friends who had like stage 3C. So
Yeah.
staging, I think sometimes, well, even my oncologist, I was trying to ask her, like, what stage am I now? And she said that's kind of old thinking.
Yeah.
I don't know what the new thinking is, but I guess they're not focusing as much on stage anymore. I mean, at least in the early stages. Stage 4, of course, is totally different, but
Yes. So that that is so I'm so glad you said that, because in regards to like your initial stage, because I think staging for some of us like makes us feel like we're aware of kind of the gravity of the situation, right? Like if we catch stage 0 cancer, right? Like that's good. It's early. Like we associate a better outcome for whatever reason,
yeah,
for a valid reason. But in the reality, like there's so much like uniqueness to every cancer, even though that there's like very structured like treatments and very structured like clinical diagnosis of the stage and like all of that. But really, it's so different, and it depends on so many different factors of like why, of like you said, like if it's, what if you took lymph nodes? What if there's so many, like, there's just so many variables. So like when people hear a stage, they could be confident in like, hey, this is early, when who knows what is what. I just feel like it's
Exactly.
this false like reassurance sometimes.
I agree. And I mean, I follow a lot of, like, when I was first diagnosed in the pandemic, Instagram was the only place that I found support because there
Yeah.
was no in-person anything. And I've since made a ton of connections in the community, as we call it, on Instagram. And like you see people who were diagnosed with stage 1, and then the next thing you know, they're stage 4.
Yeah.
So like it doesn't
Yes.
make sense. It
I
doesn't always make sense. It does give us a feeling of reassurance, but
I agree with that. Like I've seen that too. And it's so like gut wrenching because you know that like, okay, we like when they're diagnosed with like stage 1 or whatever, you know that there's that like reassurance of that like stage, nothing else, like just like that number, that
yeah.
stage. And then having that, like, that's such a, oh my God, it just like, it's all freaking horrible. Like I love that we've connected with people on the internet and Instagram and us, and but like also that we're open to so much more as well of like other people's stories, and it's so hard to not go there. Oh, it's so hard
Well, and
to, yeah,
compare
yeah.
and like look at all the things they did right and it still happened to them, or
Yeah.
yeah. And we talk a lot, and or there is a lot of talk about early catching it early, and
Yeah.
I think that that can also make our stage 4 friends feel like absolute shit because what did they
Yes.
miss, or like it's
Yeah.
no one's fault when it's caught late. And like I had cancer growing in me that I had no idea about, so, and it was caught because they were following up on
Yeah.
something else.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a mind fuck of epic proportions.
Yes.
And sometimes I think maybe I need to disengage from the community because my Lump into Lemonade account is specifically like my cancery account, and my other account I actually haven't used since like 2020. And sometimes I'm like, should I disengage and like not be part of this community? Would that be better for my mental health? I'm not sure that it would be.
Yeah. I think there's like
Um,
phases.
yeah,
Like
and I think
sometimes
I'll
you should
know.
dis.
Sorry about that. I thought I shut off notifications.
You're fine.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, I feel the same, and like I've grappled with that too, even wanting to like show up for others, like even with this podcast, like we're talking about cancer the whole time, but that's not for everybody. And you don't have to be a part of the community, but you can, or you can do it sometimes or not. Like it's
right.
whatever you handle, and it's okay either way. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be always. um I have like an Instagram account for like my, where I like, it's like very personal for my kids, and like sometimes I'm just on that because I just want not
Yeah.
cancer, but I
Yeah.
still, it.
Well, and I've kept them separate. Like, I don't
Yes,
really
because
often show my family or anything, but then I'm like, should I? Yeah, I think
well,
about it a
because
lot.
it's like a huge, it's your life right now, and it's so hard. Like it's not separate for you, you know it's not separate for the person that's going through it, but I think we also
Compartment.
compartmentalize
Yeah.
because for our own sanity maybe, but also for other, in like some kind of way to take care of others, because it's like we don't want to just like unleash all of our cancer sad stuff, but that's real,
Yeah, it
that's
is.
real.
And I do sometimes worry about what people think. Because like I'm an oversharer just in general. And then I've got this account where I share everything. And like, how am I still talking about this 4 years later? And why am I still talking about this? And why do I share the things that I do? Because it's certainly not for attention.
I get why
Yeah,
you share
and I
it.
think
Yeah.
people with cancer get why as well. And I just got a message from someone the other day, and she said, like, I don't talk about this on the internet, but I'm so grateful that you do because I had never heard someone else talk about their port that way. So, like, just a simple thing that resonated with someone else. And if that's all that I achieved through sharing my story, then I think that's pretty okay.
I agree 1000%. I agree. And I think that too is a little bit, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure when you heard that from her, that it like helped her, that is like, it's a sense of healing for us, like for the person going through it. It's like there's some kind of sense of purpose in this, like that there's some good coming out of this, like where I'm helping somebody, and you got to take all those little like glimmers of hope and all of those things.
Well, and I needed people like that
Yeah.
when I was looking for support, and like someone who was maybe a little bit ahead of me on the path, and someone like way ahead of me on the path, and other people who were like right in the same place as I was. So
Yes.
that's what I like about the community. I mean, I don't know what will happen to us breasties on Instagram, if we'll all move over to blue sky or what will happen, but it was like a game changer for me, at least during the pandemic. I mean, it still is, I guess.
100% for sure, because I felt the same way. Like I remember there are certain people that they ignited a hope in me that like I could have that after this, like I could be healthy after cancer. Like there are so many things that gave me hope,
Mhm.
and like that's why I'm here talking to you. And I say that all the time because I want to give what those people gave to me, make something out of it, make something out of this BS because
Yeah,
that's what
like
it is.
purpose from pain is what I like. For me, that's really important, but it doesn't have to be important to everybody.
Right.
Like, just
Right.
like I share a lot, someone else may not share anything, and that's okay. Like, you show up here however you want, and that's the beauty of, I guess, social media. It can be used for a lot of good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thank you for sharing too, because I do know it's hard regardless if you're comfortable with it or not. It's a very personal thing, and I think it's important for people to do, like the people who do it for others. And I just want to commend you for that, because it's it's crazy out there with this cancer stuff.
Well, and for a while, my bent was the dense breast
Mm,
part of it,
hmm.
because I didn't know until I got cancer that that was a factor in getting breast cancer, that having dense breast tissue makes you more susceptible to it, and it also makes it harder to detect. And so once I learned that, I was sharing a lot of stuff about getting screening and knowing your breast density, which most people don't. Like, I didn't know I
Yeah.
had category D extremely dense breast tissue, and that's probably why it was missed on my left side, was because the tissue itself was like hiding it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't know why that came out of nowhere, but I felt like it
It
was time.
didn't. It was what you felt strongly about sharing about, which is completely valid. And two people like who aren't directly involved, whether they don't have like a family member who's been through this, why are they thinking about it? Why would they want to think about the scary stuff? A lot of people want to kind of live in that like the land
Mhm.
of like it can't. I'm not going to think about it because it's not going to happen to me if I don't think about it, kind of thing.
Right.
And uh, you know, you want to live in that space because it's like happy and flowers and sunshine, but also would you rather be aware and educate yourself before like taking precaution or preventative measures before going through this? So I think when people talk about it more, like the dense breasts for sure, because I do think not a lot of people are like actually grasp that concept. And even to push a little bit more, maybe, hey, I have dense breasts. My doctor's like, nope, that's fine. Like maybe they'll ask more questions, or maybe they'll,
Well, and most of us don't know that, the only way to know about your breast density is to have a mammogram.
I know, yeah.
So, and at least in Ontario, they've just lowered the screening age to 40. I
Yeah.
mean, I think it still needs to, I feel like women or people with breasts should be able to have a screening mammogram at any age they want, but 40 is better than 50,
Yes.
um, which is what
we
it was. So,
gotta take the we gotta take the little wins, I guess. And I think too, like you can ask, not even like, yes, we're talking about mammogram because that's important for some diagnoses, but ultrasound too is extremely powerful in this situation. And your doctor is probably more likely, to agree to that, versus if you're asked, how doctors, you're like, oh, I want this blood work. And they're like, they kind of like brush it off. But there's different ways to navigate it. And I think this is actually a good point to bring up, the app. Oh my gosh. Know
Knowing
your
lemon.
lemons. Yes. Know your lemons for everybody listening because
Yeah,
they,
the visual on the egg carton that Know Your
yes,
Lemons uses with the 12 different signs of breast cancer is fucking fantastic.
perfect.
And I think that it's a great one for people who have breasts to take a look at because so many of those signs, like you wouldn't associate with cancer, but
Yeah.
after you see them, you're like, well, of course, like,
Yes, yes. They also have like ways you could talk to your doctor too. Like they have so much information for somebody who doesn't know anything to like guide you. It's great. But in hindsight, I definitely had some kind of signs that I wasn't even looking at because I just didn't even know from my like what your nipples should look like or not look like. Even going like I was breastfeeding at the time. And even with that, I like looking back, I'm like, I definitely think there were signs and I just wasn't even connecting the dots.
well,
So
because like we don't talk about it.
no,
Just like I think that learning how to do self breast exams should be part of like health class in high school. Like
yeah,
we don't talk about that.
yeah. It's so like they make it like an extra step now, but really it should just be a part of your normal, like, I'm going to take a shower. I'm going to do my breast
Yeah.
exam, like kind of thing. It should be very normal. And sometimes they discourage you doing breast exams because you're not a doctor. They are like, and I'm not knocking doctors, but sometimes that's the case. Like, especially if you're young. If you're young, they're like, let us handle it because like you're too young. You're not going to get cancer. Not that they might say that directly, but
I think that a lot of the times they do though. Like even my
yeah,
doctor tried to say like I'm sure it's nothing. You're too young and I was like but I still want a mammogram please. So and then we were like yeah, thank you. It's really important to have a good relationship with your doctor and like thank God she listened to me because I don't know what would have happened.
yeah, I thank God all the time too because I noticed something, went to my doctor, and my doctor noticed and ordered the diagnostic mammo and ultrasound. But what if she didn't? I was young at the time. Like I was one of those people that could have been like, oh no, you just were breastfeeding. I'm so grateful for people like her who actually like listen and take account of the patient, what they're saying, because oftentimes it's brushed aside, unfortunately.
And a lot of people just listen to their doctors, which is what we've been taught, right? The doctors know best. That's another one of the takeaways I want people to have from my story is the self-advocacy piece because the first mammogram and ultrasound I had on my breast came back saying it's benign fibroadenoma follow-up in 6 months and I was like that doesn't feel right. Something is wrong. Can I get a second opinion? And so it was only through the second opinion that the breast cancer was found on my initial side as well. So, like, if you
I
feel
mean, I
like
think I
something is
lost you
wrong with
again.
your body, don't ignore that. And it's okay to advocate for yourself. And it's actually a good thing. Oh, you're frozen. You look really pretty right now, though.
Oh, I didn't hear anything you said.
Oh, where do we leave off?
You had said that you had advocated for yourself because you felt like something was off. And that's why you ended up.
Yeah, the first time, like, even so, yeah, what I was saying was that that's what I hope people will take away from my story is the self advocacy piece, knowing your breast density. Yeah,
Yeah, and that's a huge important factor. And to ask, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to question the doctor. It's okay. It doesn't mean that they're bad people. It doesn't mean that you think you know more than them, but you're allowed to question things. And it's so important to question things. Like, I know it's scary, but it's important. And who cares if a doctor thinks you look stupid, if that's what you're afraid of? Like, who cares in the grand scheme of things?
and I've pissed a lot of people off on this. I don't like to call it a journey. I say experience, but whatever works for people is fine. But I've become somebody who like I call the booking desk once I know that something has been ordered to try to like this most recent time I needed a follow-up ultrasound of my armpit and so what happened was I had the CT scan to follow up from my lung nodule, and it was a Thursday night, and the results came into my Pocket Health, it's called.
Mhm.
So I could see the report, and it was like suspicious malignancy, and I was like, "What in the?"
Yeah.
So 9 o'clock on Friday morning, I called the cancer center, my family doctor, and this previous surgeon I had to to try to find out who could get me an ultrasound as fast as possible. I don't know about you guys in the States, but here there's like a shortage of radiologists right now, and like you
Jeez.
wait weeks for ultrasounds. But I was like, I cannot wait. So once I knew that the referral had gone in, I called the booking desk and shared my story with the nice lady on the other end of the phone. And I was like, I've had cancer twice. My mental health cannot sustain waiting. Like, is there a way you could get me in sooner than, I don't know what they were looking at? She was like, well, how about Monday? And I was like, how about today? She's like, could you get here? She said, my husband had stomach cancer, so I understand. Can you get here for 11 o'clock? So she got me in that day, brought her a jar of jam, gave her a hug, thanked her
Oh.
for getting me in. But like, that's the person I've become now. Is
But what if you didn't ask?
what I say is no asky, no getty. So
Right.
the
Amen.
worst they can say is no, right?
Right. Exactly. And the fact that her husband had stomach cancer, there are so many people that are touched by this craziness of cancer. And if you are diagnosed, you only find that out more because once you say it, it's okay for somebody else to say it. Yes, ask, and you never know. You just never know how it could benefit you. It's so important to just put yourself out there.
Well, and like also being kind to people.
Yeah.
Like when I make these phone calls, I'm not an asshole, but I'm also quite direct about what I need and why I need it. So it doesn't always work out, but sometimes like that saved me a weekend of hell waiting. Um, and like we all know that, or not we all know, you and I both know that like the waiting is the worst part.
Yeah.
Like waiting for the unknown is the absolute worst part. So I was
Yeah.
able to save myself some waiting.
Absolutely. And that's huge. That is so huge. And I'm really glad that you did that. And I hope you continue to do things like that and advocate for yourself.
I will, because it has paid off. And yeah, the worst thing that can happen is I'm stuck with a date, but maybe
Mhm.
I'm not.
Yeah. Now, I always like to end these conversations with kind of a reflection where so you are still in the thick of it right now, but in the beginning, when you were first diagnosed, is there anything that you've learned along the way that you would tell yourself when you were first diagnosed, for all the people that might be listening that are just diagnosed?
It is just what I said. Like the waiting is the fucking worst part. And when you're in that waiting, it is hell and it is angst ridden and it is the worst, but it won't always feel like that. Like you won't always feel like that kind of hell. It won't always feel like that.
That it's this pocket. There's pockets. I've talked to somebody about it too, where it's like you're gonna have, even when you're going through it, you're gonna have really good days. You're gonna have really bad days. Like it's not this like linear thing. You're gonna feel like pure shit some days where you don't want to talk to anybody, and other days you're gonna be like, I have cancer, but I feel good. Like I'm doing good mentally, and it's okay. Variation.
Yes, they can exist at the same, both
Yes.
and is what I say. The both ands of Cancerland. Like I made a poem about it. I wrote a poem
Oh,
about it. It's on my Instagram and it's so true. Like two things can be, you can be experiencing the worst pain, but it's possible to also experience joy at the same time. Like
yeah.
they're not separate usually.
Yeah. And I think that's so important to say, just because sometimes when you think cancer, you think just constant doom and gloom. And while there is that, it's not so straightforward in that all the time. I just feel like that's important to say for some reason.
And also somebody, like a really wise woman in my life, told me early on, she's like, cancer will teach you some shit if you let it. And
Mm,
like, boy, has it. Teaches you who your people are,
mm,
who your people are not, what's important to you, gives you perspective. I mean, not that I was just thinking about this the other day. Like, yeah, I just had something happen that had given me like another perspective or reminded me of what's important. And I was like, I did forget that in that
yeah.
period of time where, the cancer piece wasn't so acute and in my face. Like we gain and lose perspective all the time.
Yes. 100%. I was just talking to my husband about this the other day, where it's like no one wants cancer to teach you these things, but if you let it, you could really benefit from it. And reflecting
Oh my
on that
God.
often, I think, is a good way to try to like maintain that lesson. We just got disconnected. I'll just wait.
You there?
Yeah, I'm there. The internet's silly. Um,
That's okay.
but I think I was saying if you allow it to teach you something, if you allow yourself to remember that and reflect on it from time to time, and to like kind of recenter yourself, because what you learn can be so like life changing, but you get caught up like when you are on the outside of it, like as a survivor, for me at least, you you do get further away from those lessons learned and life gets crazier. You get back into like the swing of things, and which is amazing and thank God. But don't like the lessons you can learn from cancer can really be so monumental. And I think it's if you're going to let good from come from it, like let it be those things that could change your life, change your thought process for the better. Why not?
But also, at the same time, it doesn't have to be a profound experience for people either, right? Like,
Right. Like you
people
don't
want
have to go want to like travel the
no,
world.
you don't have to quit your job
Right.
and leave your husband and like
No.
it doesn't have to be so profound either. Like, there's a lot of pressure, I think, in the community
Yes.
to have that and like be the pink warrior princess who slays the cancer dragon and then goes on to
That's all
do.
a perception. That
Yes.
is all a perception, because I totally agree. Like I remember feeling like this weird feeling about that, because it's like, oh, you're supposed to just immediately be grateful for life, and you're immediately supposed to want to like do all these things because you have cancer now, and like you want to just live your best life. And the reality is like the lessons, at least for me, that I've learned are very simple lessons, but they are profound in the simple, like in my own life and my own thought process. Like I am still a homebody. I don't want to go travel places. I don't want to go like achieve quit things and do all these massive things. It's just like these small tweaks that we could just continue to allow hope in our lives and allow positivity in our lives. And yes, it doesn't have to be this like life altering change, because that's a lot of
But
freaking
there is
pressure.
pressure. But there is
Yeah.
pressure to make it so, or to not, or to only share the positive things, which if you follow my account is not what I do. But yeah, lots of pressure in the community, I think.
Yeah, especially, I mean, that's the internet generally, like people show the highlight reels and
Highlight
whatnot,
reels. Yes.
literal reels, but it's just not, that's not the constant, that is not, cancer isn't pretty. It's just
No,
not.
it's not.
Like, period. But yeah, so I'm glad that you said that, because don't, the pressure needs to go away. Like that just needs to stop. And I think that's just a good point to make aware for sure.
I mean, everybody loves a comeback story though, so there's that piece as
That's what
well.
I'm saying. That's for other people. Like it's not necessarily like the truth of the matter. That's why I called this podcast After the Bell, because the second like you're done with what you like active treatment, it's like the world, like,
That's when the hard work
yeah,
starts.
like you get smacked in the face several times from like the reality of what cancer has done.
Yeah.
And it takes work. It's
And
not easy
no.
at
And
all.
that's when you're left with dealing with what the fuck just happened to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I try to verbalize that just because I wasn't aware of that. I thought it was going to be like, "Oh, chemo's done, like whoop whoop, living," like no. No. It takes so
You
much
must
work
be so
to
happy you're all better now.
right, yes, and I was definitely the person to be like, "Yeah, no." Like, "That's not how this happened. This is not working for me like that." But it doesn't mean that it can't get better, but it takes so much freaking work. Like, it's not a simple flick of the switch. Not,
If only it was. I mean, that
right?
would be great.
Right. So thank you so much for
Thank
sharing
you so
and
much.
talking. I had such a great conversation with you. And I hope you the best in the rest of this, because you're it sucks and you are a strong person. I am so grateful that you are very vulnerable with sharing and the real, like up and down. And I think that you are going to help a lot of people in that way, whether you know it or not. So thank you.
Yes. I mean, that's the thing. We don't always know the impact, right? We
Right.
rarely know the impact we have on other people.
Right.
Sometimes we get little like snippets of it when
Mhm.
somebody says, "Hey, thank you," but mostly we don't know.
Yeah, it's so true.
So,
So I'll put your information in the caption if you're okay with that for people to reach out. And thank you again. And I really appreciate our conversation.
you're just like you seem online, and I like that.
Oh, thanks. I love that you just said that. Thank you. That really made my day.